Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Future Van 2020. My name is Fergus McVey. I'm the CEO of Sense Research UK, and I want to tell you about the CV world as it is today. And that means, of course, we're talking about the world of CV-19, COVID-19, and whatever else has happened in the interim period. I guess the first question to answer is, who is this guy? Like, who am I? What am I doing here? But also, what is going on? We are a company that deals in research, opinion and facts. So we do a lot of focus groups and interviews and conversations with people. So that might take the form of sort of questionnaires as well, surveys, online communities, and we take data that is either in the public realm or is connected, let's say, to mobile networks or indeed belongs to our clients. And we work through that data to try and get to a picture of what's going on. Our company itself happens to work very strongly in transport, general automotive, commercial vehicles specifically, as well as business-to-business stuff. So we've been looking over this year at an awful lot of interesting things and stuff that's going to be of absolute pertinence to the people in the room, in these Zoom rooms, watching this. We also work in sport and retail and luxury, but well, things not going so interestingly for those markets as it happens. And the kinds of things we're doing are completely bespoke. So we might be looking at the demand for hyperluxury SUVs in the Middle East, or we might be counting people at train stations, or we might be helping people to develop a brand or a product or a service. That might be in secret or it might be in public. And it's basically when anyone is entering or developing or checking what's going on in their market. So we work in business, we work for government, and we work in the third sector, so, you know, suppliers to the government and academia, etc. And anybody who's, you know, what are people thinking, what are they doing, or what are they going to do? They can come to us and we can tell them. So let's have a look at what's going on. What the hell do we know? Well, this year we've been working on a project called the NRTS for the DFT, and that was, the plan was to visit 2,500 train stations, do 10,000 days of field work combining mobile network data with live survey data and footfall counts to find out what's going on the rail networks. We also did a project called Driving the Future, which we've been doing for a couple of years now. We talk to 3,000 people a year, and it's a full public access database that we create. So if there's anybody who's watching this who finds any of the data points we talk about interesting, I can share all of those with you, and we can cut that to be, you know, relevant to your industry or to your logistic needs. This year we added COVID questions as well to this project. In the B2B world, we've been talking to, for example, people about business premises, 1,000 business owners, real business owners, not people who were just claiming to be business owners so that they could do our survey, but we very carefully sift through all the results to make sure we've got real people. And we were asking those businesses who they are and how they want to be looked after. And finally, for the commercial vehicles worlds, we've been doing brand trackers, one specific brand tracker for a van agency, van manufacturer. We've been doing focus groups, and we're basically interviewing thousands of commercial vehicle operators and owners a year. So what can I tell you about all of this? Well, the first thing is I can't tell you about any of that stuff because, of course, that's commercially confidential, and you wouldn't expect us to breach that confidence. But the Driving the Future study is a good place to start as any, as that is talking to not only people involved in the commercial vehicles world and in vans and logistics, it's also talking to ordinary people who are the people that you are delivering to and the people that you are trying to get around when you're doing it. So we have some interesting stuff to talk to you about that. And after that, we're going to talk about the future of the vans and what this necessarily or may mean for that. And what have we seen briefly? We've seen a huge change in demand for transport, as of course you know. We've seen a big drop in car use during lockdown, and we're going to see a big drop in commuting post-lockdown. Now, that's not just because people are no longer have jobs, though that is going to be an impact. There's going to be a lot more working from home. Working from home is going to have a drastic effect, a big effect on what people are doing and where they're doing it. So we're going to know, we've found even though people are working from home a lot more, roads will still be busy, but rail will be much less so. And there's some interesting implications around that. what are those impacts going to be? Well, we're certainly going to see a change in city centre footfall. Will that rebalance the towns? What's that going to mean for commercial rents? What does that mean for deliveries? We think there's going to be a radically changed transportation landscape. And of course, everybody who's watching this is very interested in what that landscape may look like. And let's look first of all at what the general public think is going to happen. The general public are very much of the opinion that this is going to change their lives. 60% of large city commuters will rethink their transport. Now, given that most large city commuters are using public transport, 60% of them think they're going to do something different. 70% are more cautious about public transport. That means it's going to have some kind of impact. They've got to commute somehow. 56%, by the way, of all commercial vehicle owner drivers, and we'll be talking a lot about the CVODs as we go through, they think, and that's all of them, not just large city, they think they will be rethinking their transportation. Only half of all the respondents that we spoke to will use their car in the same way as they did before this happened. So there are some big changes coming. We've got 1 in 4 city dwellers will use their car more, but less than 1 in 10 people in rural and village areas. So city dwellers say that they're going to start using their car more. Is there space on the roads in cities for that? And let's see what happens. 1 in 10 in rural, does that mean they're not going to be using the bus anymore? Well, we can surmise that actually people in rural areas, village areas, are already using their cars pretty much as they could. Why only 1 in 10 going to use it more? Because they're finding actually that there are other ways to get what they need. There are people shopping online, and there are people who are working from home, if that's possible for them. And so we're not going to see a big change, we don't think, in rural and village areas, but city centres, possible big change coming. But we're going to look at some more data around that in a moment. 40% of motorbike owners in large cities will use them more. So more bikes. I know how much all van drivers love bikes, except when it's a van driver riding that bike. And we know that there are quite a few of those around. We're actually going to see some data on that in a minute. But think about your drops. More bikes, more e-bikes, more e-scooters. Demand for those is all up dramatically in cities. When we're allowed out again, we're going to see quite a different shape to those cities. We know that there are e-scooter trials going on. Why does that matter for logistics? Well, it matters because if your operators are out there attempting to deliver, what does that mean if there are a whole load of scooters flying past? So who is going to drive less? Well, we know that in the cities, 39% of large city drivers are going to drive less. We've got somewhere around 41% in small cities. So it's not just about those places with large public transport infrastructures. In small cities, that's going to drop down as well. In the towns, it's about 37%, so it's about the same. And in rural areas, it's about 42%. So that means that only 1 in 10 in rural and villages are going to use their cars more, but 42% say they're going to use it less. What's the balance? They say, people tell us that the net number reducing car use will be 25% less car use overall. Now, that's interesting in terms of the overall capacity of the road network and what that means for your operations on roads when they're on roads, but it also means interesting things for rail. Let's think about, what does working from home mean for road capacity? Well, if 46% tell us that they're going to work from home more, I think that that could halt an increase in demand for road capacity. In other words, what's the point of building more roads if there's nobody there to use them? What's the point of that Cambridge to Oxford Relief Road if there's expressway if there's nobody there to use it? We think this also could demolish the tube and rail season ticket model. And we don't use that word lightly. There is some fairly basic and quite crude maths that I'm going to show you in a minute that will show you why we think that's a thing. Less commuting and less shopping means less demand and less revenue for the rail and the tube, but it also means that people aren't going to be in those places anymore. What does that mean? Well, when we ask people specifically, will you keep your season ticket when the economy returns to normal? Probably, definitely not. 36% of people pretty much, and that depended on the same number of people being employed, by the way, which we know is not going to be the case. So that's going to hit footfall and demand for transportation anyway. If we apply that rough calculation to the season ticket revenue for London Underground, 1.72 billion, and the 2019 season ticket rail season ticket revenue at 2.13 billion, you could see that that's a drop of 600 million from the London Underground budget and 750 million from the rail budget. Now, we've already seen billions being spent every month keeping the rail going, and we've just seen the big bailout for London Underground. But if they thought that was a temporary measure, and we thought that we could bail them out once and then things will be getting back to normal, even if the economy gets back to normal, it won't get back to normal because a lot of people will be working from home. That's not just a slight shift. That means if 20% of office workers aren't there anymore because they're working from home one day more, that's 20% less footfall in every one of those businesses around there that depends upon them. So to maintain services on those things like London Underground and the rail, they're going to have to get that revenue from somewhere else. Does that mean no more road building? Does that mean much less road maintenance? What does that mean for the logistics of both of those industries? So what do we think is going to happen after lockdown? Well, we asked people on the left here, blue circle is I'm going to use it less, and the yellow circle is I'm going to use it more. Car users over here on the left, 39% say use it less, 14% say use it more. That's a net negative, as we said, of 25%. For motorcycles, as we saw, great increase in motorcycle use, 34% up, only 26% down, means net use up 8%. But what about commercial vehicles? Well, those of you who can draw a line between two dots may be able to guess this answer. It's about the same, is what our commercial vehicle respondents were telling us. They are around 30% saying they're going to use it less, or they're going to have less use of their vehicles, and 27% saying they're going to have more use of their vehicles. The question, though, is really, does that mean that the commercial vehicle world, despite everything that's happened, is basically going to be unchanged? There's going to be the same number of movements, that some people will be more and some people will be less. Well, who is it affecting is the question. As we saw earlier, in large cities, car use could peak, could get higher. It's going to get quite close to this 39% of people are saying that they're going to use their cars less. So actually, large cities, it's still going to be a bit of a nightmare. Maybe less traffic around, but there's not going to be a massive reduction. Everyone else seems to think they're going to use their cars less overall. What's interesting here is thinking about our young eco-warrior friends, Gen Z and the millennials. They're actually increasing their car usage quite a lot now. That coincides with the fact that many of them live in big cities and can't afford to live out in rural areas yet. But it also means that they are suddenly going to start getting into cars. We know anecdotally lots and lots of Gen Zs and millennials getting their first cars. You see lots and lots and lots of learner drivers on the road, people being taught to drive. I'm sure you've all been sat in a van behind them. There has been quite an uptick in that sense, and we could see that maybe there's going to be a much easier time in terms of time to destination, deliveries and so on in towns and villages, but cities are still going to be a bit of a problem. And there's not that many people living in cities, right? So a tiny few people are affecting that number. What does that mean in terms of the COVID impact? Well, just asking commercial vehicle owners and users, what are they doing at the moment? It seems most of them are out on their motorbikes, certainly much more than people who don't own CVs. So the column on the left is non-commercial vehicle drivers, and the column on the right is commercial vehicle drivers or owners. And as we could see, commercial vehicle guys are out and about a lot more. Makes a lot of sense. Got to drive to the depot, got to get out and make their journeys. This is in terms of their car usage. And this is during lockdown. So car usage during lockdown. You could see massively higher, the blue line, massively higher amongst commercial vehicle audience. Motorbike use up quite a bit. And even push bikes, you eco-warriors, you up 7% on car versus car owners. So, or non-CV owners. So what does that mean, though, in terms of size of van? What's interesting to note is the really big difference. Having said that, we thought that there was basically the same amount of people using it more versus using it less. What we're seeing here is a very big difference given the size of the vehicles. So small vans are very much currently in lockdown using their vans less. Medium vans, quite a bit less, so 36% less for the small van on balance, 36% less on the small van, 18% less on the medium van. Large vans and trucks, everything's fine. We're using it about the same. The people who use it less outweighed exactly by the people who use it more in both instances. That must mean, of course, that people who are using large vans and trucks are absolutely fine and have not been impacted by this coronavirus incident at all. But what do they think is going to happen post-lockdown? What are they expecting? What does it feel like to them? Well, the small van owners, indeed, the use it less has dropped down quite a bit, but the use it more has not increased. So people are thinking, I'm locked down, but there's a big difference in terms of what people are expecting, people who use small vans. So those are people perhaps in cities, but also small vans, as we know, tend to be in terms of the market share, owned more by small operators, individual businesses, small guys. Whereas when we get to the medium vans, they're seeing a pretty significant recovery. So the medium van guys back up by 30%. They are expecting that lockdown will be for them temporary, and they will come back post-lockdown. Large vans, it's going to be pretty much the same post-lockdown for them. Whereas trucks, up a great deal. They're thinking that it's going to come out, even though we say that there's the balance there is exactly the same. They don't see any problems for them. And in terms of compared to the people who will use it less after, there's a nice positive spin for that, 14%. So what we're seeing is very much different attitudes in terms of the different types of vehicles that these guys own or operate. And there's a very big difference, particularly for the small van owners, the small vehicle owners. Those are the guys who are really seeing worry. They're the people who are a bit more perturbed about what could happen afterwards. What does this mean? Well, the massive reorganisation of public transport, I think, is fairly obvious. We've already got no more train operating companies, no more franchise system. That's gone. The old days of arguing about whether we should have let Virgin Rail operate this or that piece of the track is gone. There will be fewer passengers, that much we can guarantee. That means there's more freight capacity because they need the money from somewhere. Does that mean we'll be seeing greater emphasis on trying to sell freight on the rail network? For example, they have obviously just cancelled Crossrail 2, but not HS2. HS2 is coming. What the hell are you going to use it for if there's, if the business case is not made, and if we're not matching the business case that they had for HS2? We feel that the city centre roads will be busier, or certainly busier than the roads outside the city centre. And does that mean also that we're going to see a greater need for last mile and many more individual parcel deliveries, as opposed to just delivering to that once to that office? You're going to have to deliver to many, many people. Everybody's, personal Amazon deliveries coming in to one office was one thing. Now they're going to be scattered to all sorts of different houses in different places. In terms of what that means for business, we can see an obvious drop in city footfall. Does that mean a rebalance to the towns? Does that mean that people, instead of traveling to cities to work, will be staying at home, or another possibility, moving to serviced offices in towns? We've seen that movement already, even whilst people are quite unsure of what's happening. Most people spent the first lockdown trying to figure out how Zoom worked, and then trying to figure out how to stop their dogs sitting on the desk, or their teenagers coming in, or their babies crying. The idea that they're going to go back to an office, or that their company will want to pay for an office, now that they have a system which allows them to just not pay for that and just have people pay for their own office space, seems that we are going to have quite a lot more people looking for somewhere else to work, nipping into town during their lunch break, trying to find some way of getting out of there when the kids come home from school. We think commercial rents will probably fall because this is a perfect storm for retail. There's the downturn, inevitable, but there's increased use of online shopping and working from home, means that the footfall for retail is going to drop 3 times for 3 reasons. And of course, hospitality industry follows the workforce. Your deliveries in and out of hospitality, or people that service hospitality, they will be reduced in cities. Many offices we know are not coming back. Barclays have talked about the ridiculousness of having 10,000 people in one office block in Canary Wharf, and noting that they have this vast estate of offices ready built in every town around the country. They can send people to work where they live. Deloitte have said similar things. Facebook, even Google, all of these people who started out with the whole, should have been the most decentralized people around, they're already telling people like Nan Securities and stuff that they're not coming back to their offices. What does that mean for commercial rents? What's happening to all that space? Who's going to be servicing that stuff? Are we delivering things there? It's going to be a big difference in city centres, not just because of occasional extra days working from home, but because lots of people, lots of that critical mass in the city centre have just gone. They're just going somewhere else. What we could say about commercial vehicles is that small van owners are worried. We know that those guys are going to need the help and reassurance more than pretty much anybody else. That's small businesses when they're using small vans. Medium vans expect a big bounce back. Is that just because they all expect to be delivering for Hermes in the same way that they are now? Large and trucks appear to think that everything obviously is great, unless they are just too focused on what's not going to happen at that massive car park in Kent. We think clearly this shows that there has to be a refocus of logistic capacities. But what is also an opportunity for the industry, we've talked many times about the lack of people who are prepared to do those long distance truck driving trips. It seems that there is a bit more of a desire to do the short form local DPD Hermes kind of work, but that working as in trucks and larger vehicles over longer distances was something that we'd been talking about there being a problem with. Well, actually, this is a big influx of highly approachable customer service type people from the hospitality industry. You've got people from offices who are no longer employed, who may be good at organizing things or logistics. So actually, for the logistics industry, this represents something of an opportunity to rebalance that weakness that there had been in terms of the workforce. If we then ask, what does that mean then about future vans? I think we were talking, and people have spoken about how the idea of platooning, how the idea of autonomy is obviously quite positive, because it reduces that dependence on that diminishing pool of people who are prepared to do the job. This may also help with that, but is it actually coming? Well, let's look at what we think of as autonomy. It's clear that obviously there are car companies out there who are investing billions in hopefully selling cars to drivers, or leasing cars to drivers, and that technology will then spread out into other areas. If those car companies want to sell that stuff to people, they're going to need to make it appealing. There are 5 generally accepted levels of autonomy, from driver assist, ABS, and cruise control at level 1, all the way up to level 5, which is complete full autonomy, where human control is not possible. There are no controls at all. And let's see what people think of these ideas. So at the top, 10 out of 10, very supportive. At the bottom, quite anxious about this. And we split that across ages, because everybody knows, of course, that the kids are really into technology. They're going to love this stuff. So if we put level 5, level 4, level 3, level 2, oh, big jump there, level 1, and see what the silent generation, so we'll start with the oldest, and then we'll move to the boomers and see what they think. Well, it's clear, obviously, that the younger you get, so silent generation is your sort of 85s plus, they're not particularly interested in level 1 autonomy, frankly, let alone level 5. And generally speaking, it's a bit more supportive as you move back towards the boomers. Generation X, a little bit younger, surely they support this sort of stuff much more. Absolutely. That line is just growing as you get younger. You get more supportive of the idea of autonomy. And as you can see at the bottom, that's people who are very anxious. And at the top there is support. As we move into the millennials, I'm going to let you guess that by the position of the arrow, they're getting more and more supportive. This is a range of 1 to 10, by the way. So we're not seeing like huge numbers supporting going right up to 10. But of course, what we can expect with General Z is that we'll see huge numbers of them saying, yes, I absolutely dig this technology and I'm totally going to buy it? Or are we? No, in fact, in our survey, Gen Z now drop off. They're about as supportive as Gen X. They're not as supportive of autonomous vehicles and autonomous tech as I think everybody thinks. And certainly, as much as the car companies think they are. The car companies are developing this tech because they think somebody is going to put their hands in their pocket and pay for it. People desperately want autonomous vehicles. It's so cool. They're definitely going to spend loads of extra money on having something else do their driving for them, right? Well, what's interesting is we spend a lot of our time helping car companies develop products, and there are various ratings. There are various metrics that we use to understand whether something is popular enough to support. That rating is around about this red line. No element of autonomy goes above that red line for any generation, even millennials, and that is for level 1 driver assist like ABS. So people are using this stuff already, and they already hate the idea of autonomy. This is an average, of course, and the word autonomy is scary. But the problem is that cabs are scary. People don't want to have less freedom, and that's what autonomy gives you, less freedom. And technology on its own just isn't a good enough reason to do it. It has to be better. It has to give them something more. But why are Gen Z skeptical? Why are the young people skeptical? Why is it that we're not going to see the people who need to pay for this stuff actually bothering to put their hands in their pocket and coughing it up? Because if we don't do that, that's technology is not going to spill out into commercial vehicle world. So what's happening here? We're asking people again, cab owner drivers, the commercial vehicle world versus the non-commercial vehicle world. Green for our commercial vehicles guys, our logistics guys. Yellow for normal people. In terms of level 1, there is about the same sort of response. As we get to level 2, it's dropping down. What's interesting is that you see that the commercial vehicles guys are clearly more supportive of autonomy. They're confident at level 5, far more, about half as much again, as normal people. But this is because, of course, people who are in logistics understand transportation and are just generally going to know more about it. The type of connected autonomous vehicle that we're talking about, so if it's a connected autonomous car, how are people feeling in terms of their confidence around those versus buses? Well, it drops off in the same way between people who are involved in commercial vehicles and people who aren't. The bigger the thing, the scarier it is. And the commercial vehicle audience is much more accepting of the idea of autonomy than the non-commercial people, but it's still very low. There is not a mass of people saying, this is great. Let's look though at commercial vehicle owners' confidence around these things. So commercial vehicles confidence in cabs is almost twice as high, cabs being connected autonomous vehicles, twice as high as normal people. Here is a section, and we asked people various questions and divided them into groups. Alarmists, people who are terrified of connected autonomous vehicles. Skeptics, they're not so sure. Swing votes, they could be persuaded, and supporters who think it's a great idea. People who own commercial vehicles or operate commercial vehicles, easily twice as supportive as people who don't. They're saying things like 3 or 4 times as much, it's a good idea. Half as many people are ambivalent. Less people are concerned or scared, although pretty much the same thing is a bad idea. What's interesting is that commercial vehicle owners are saying that they think autonomy is a good idea. 4 in 10 say it's a good idea compared to less than, what's that, 1.5 in 10 for normal people. Isn't that turkeys voting for Christmas? Or are we thinking that because they know that much more, they think level 5 is never going to come, which is something that we think is highly unlikely that the industry will ever achieve level 5. It's just too darned expensive and difficult to do, and nobody wants to pay for it. And also, I think if they're thinking, if you're a driver, if you're a delivery driver, if you're somebody who operates a port, if you are moving vehicles around within your depot, having them do that stuff, the boring kind of normal stuff on their own or with minimal people involved, is actually quite appealing because it's going to make life quite a lot easier. So what will roads be for, do we think? What's the place that we're going to be operating? What's that going to be like in terms of what the public think? The public think that they will always drive themselves, own a luxury car, and be uncomfortable even at level 2? Well, let's have a look. 45% of people want to always drive themselves, and that's still 40% amongst Gen Z. 15% still want to own a luxury car, but that's 29% amongst Gen Z, meaning there's still a demand for kids, younger people think they still want to own their own luxury vehicle. 45% are uncomfortable with level 2 autonomy. That's just anything slightly better than ABS. Only 15% think that autonomous vehicles will ever replace cars, and 31% feel vulnerable around autonomous vehicles, and that's 45% of Gen Zs. And so those are the people who are supposed to be born and live with this technology, and they're the people who are scared, who are most scared of it. Does that mean they're ever going to support it? It doesn't seem that way to me. A third of people just have no idea what the purpose of an autonomous vehicle is in terms of their own lives. So what are they going to buy post-lockdown? Again, in all large cities, e-bikes, 20% of all the people who live in large cities say they want to buy an e-bike. 11% of all the people in scooters say they want to buy an e-bike, and 28% say they want to get a bicycle. So in terms of what you're doing in large cities, that's going to be quite interesting. The future of public mobility, therefore, is much more owned. So people are owning it, not sharing it. It's much more individual. It's much more human, and it's much more on the road than we might expect. And that's the kind of landscape that you're going to need to deal with. And finally, what does that mean? What's going to happen for you guys? Well, in autonomous, there is massive public skepticism. There's no demand for level 4 or particularly level 5. That is a solution in search of a problem. And that means that that tech isn't going to be funded for your industry either. For many people, cars equal freedom. Autonomy, therefore, cannot equal freedom. Nobody is desperate to have less freedom. There is a strong need still. People want to express themselves through ownership of or expressing their abilities to acquire objects that express their position in society. But the business case for autonomy requires mass public adoption. And so who's going to pay for that? Because actually, mostly it seems that people in general don't want to pay for that. Can the tech get there? Well, level 5 has been on the brink, coming out next year for years. And many big players have pulled out. So we're not seeing the Google car anymore. That's gone. We are not seeing the Apple car. That's gone. That's because of the business case. So they can't actually find a way of funding this thing because not enough people want it. And it's also really, really difficult. Tesla have been told that they can't use the term full autonomy, and they will be sued if they did. It's only ever going to be pseudo level 4, so level 3 plus at best anyway. We think that the idea of martini autonomy, anytime, any place, anywhere, is just not possible. It's too big to do, and there's just no money in it. So why would they bother? It requires exponential levels of code, and frankly, humans are just cheaper. They're pretty good. Any of you guys who are operating a depot, some of the guys who work with you are all right, and the ladies, of course. And actually, when it comes to doing autonomy, if you build a machine that is 100% capable or 100% responsible for that journey, you'll get the blame for it when it goes wrong, as opposed to right now, you can blame the human operator. The world is too complex to map sufficiently, and it's much easier to blame people when it goes wrong. Even we are still surprised by stuff on a day-to-day basis. So finally, tech can't get to level 5. The tech is suited to kind of predictable, unsurprising environments, places that you can control 100%, airports, car parks to venues, Milton Keynes. Drones may be able to deal with some last mile stuff, but don't forget what happened when we did other sort of putting public transportation on display in front of the great British public when we had the e-bikes trials. Most of them ended up in rivers or they were stolen. People just couldn't understand that. The idea of flying in an expensive drone to land on your doorstep in somewhere where the kids might have access to catapults or air guns just suggests to me that that's not going to last very long. So real last mile stuff is still going to be required, and that means walking up garden paths, it means parking in unusual places, it means really difficult stuff that machines are just never going to understand. So level 3 and level 4 may well provide efficiencies of multi-mode, of how making sure that your drivers can rest. But really when it becomes time to physically take it from the vehicle to the door, when it comes time to change the tractor, when it becomes time to load or unload those boxes, there's just no getting around the fact that you're always going to need humans, and they're just kind of better than machines. So if there are other questions that you have, if there are things that you'd like to understand about this data set or about other data sets, or want to get us involved in some questions that you've got, please do get in touch.